Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
What's happening,
so
superstar?
Excited. What is happening? I'm sitting here with the one and only.
Well, the one and only Becky G, everybody. What is the middle of the room? And I mean this on a personal level, not as Becky G, the superstar who knows how to make sure that people understand what is on brand, but the human being that I know you are too, very deep and vulnerable person. How is that room for you when you're in it, in the middle of it? Being someone who's come from the outside and worked your way up, are you comfortable when it's all flashy and going for it?
I think in moments like that, a lot of revelation comes to me. I really struggle with being present in a moment because I'm a bit of a perfectionist because I've been doing this for so long. I feel like my chances have only gotten slimmer. Like it's now or never, you know? And so how I exist in a space today has become so much more evident than it's ever been. And I think this is the truest I've ever been to myself, the most authentic I've ever been. And it's funny because I think 14-year-old Becky really thought she knew who she was and exactly where she was going and had no idea.
That's how you survive. It's such a confusing time. How else are you going to get through each day unless you tell yourself that you've got all the answers?
Absolutely. But I think it's another superpower to lean into, to admit that you don't. And I think that's the hardest one to practice. And I kind of was, whether, you know, for some it's intentional to be robbed of this childhood, you know, because there's bad people around them and bad managers and bad contracts and just conniving people who have their own motives. It wasn't the case for me at all, but still unintentionally robbed of that innocence, that childhood, that a normal, you know, 13-year-old, 14-year-old. And a lot of, to be honest, you don't have to be a pop star to know what that is today and age because of social media.
Correct.
But I experienced it before this era, I think. And it kind of changed a lot for me. And then I was also the oldest of 4 kids. My parents were high school sweethearts and they're no longer together now. But, you know, that relationship was just figuring it out all together, you know? And so it just was you have to have it together. And even if you don't, you got to act like it.
God, so much that's just wrapped up in that. I mean, as a kid of divorce and then watching your parents who've created this enormous bond and built this wonderful foundation, a safe space for you to grow and experiment and figure out who you are. And then to be put in a situation where it's like, all right, now I have to think on my own terms because I don't have that union to lean into like by default anymore. How impactful was that upon you realizing that your independence was kind of your future?
I think ESQUEMAS is a really beautiful representation of that journey of self-discovery in this phase of my life. Because I think it's funny, age and maturity are like 2 very different things. I think a lot of people get it confused. A lot of individuals my age, I think, feel this pressure that we have to have all the answers and we have to have a plan and we have to execute, and it's like complete opposite for me. And so this album, when I was creating it, it was in 2 different phases of my life, and one phase of it was very dark and very emotional, very triggering for me, very cathartic to kind of start the beginning of that phase of the album in a writing camp with 3 of like my girlfriends, like in a house, and like female producer, 2 female songwriters.
Amazing.
Who got me, and it was just like we were just vibing, and it was so much fun. Yeah, and it was different. It was like a different experience for me to like be a part of that and like create under my own terms versus like, okay, this is the deadline and this is what we have to do. We were just creating just to create because it was a pandemic. I mean, we weren't doing anything.
Yeah, you got absolutely no time restrictions, but also you have this absolute need to express yourself rather than a desire to.
Yes.
And there is a fundamental difference between the 2. Yeah. So in those sessions when it's coming out of you, whether you like it or not, like it's survival, like was it scary to listen back to what you were releasing and what you were putting?
Oh no, it's like my favorite. That's what I mean about it feeling like the truest and most authentic version of myself that I've ever gotten to be as an artist, because there's real significance. And I always give purpose to the things that I do, and I do everything with intention. Even the album before was intentional. Certain songs and what they said and how atrevidas they were, you know, out there pushing boundaries.
But I sort of feel like that album,
barriers.
to some degree, was sort of a way for you to come to terms with who you've been.
Definitely.
In your life.
For sure.
Whereas this sounds like an album which is very much in line with who you are.
Yes, exactly. And Mala Santa was that duality. That was my first album, that duality of me, of being able to be the good girl, but also still having that risky business side of me where I just wanted to break things at the seams, you know? And now ESQUEMAS is literally like, for me, a representation for youth, not just young women, but just youth, to really understand that they can break the molds, that the boxes are just a figure of society's way of keeping us where we're supposed to be, whatever that means. But the creative mind and the heart, at the end of the day, it's just like there are no limits to it. It's boundless, exactly. So esquemas, to romper esquemas is what this is.
When I was at Coachella, what I saw on weekend one was Anita came out and just destroyed. Carol came out and just laid waste. And I just saw powerful female performers, and in particular, like Carol, just coming out there and owning her moment. Unapologetically.
Yeah.
And you shared a stage with her in that moment too. Yeah. And so that even though there's a lot of work to be done, you're part of a generation of artists that are definitely continuing that work. And does it feel like it's working?
I think we're all just being, and I think that's maybe the best part about it is what you see is what you get. I have the pleasure of being really great friends with Anita, and she is just through in and throughout from the day that I met her. And I know everyone who meets her can say the same exact thing, has always been the same person.
Purely authentic, hands down.
Plays hard, works twice as hard.
What she said about social media, Jackson, do you remember? She was just like, my relationship with my fans is really straightforward.
Oh, it's so clear.
When I'm working, I'm all yours. When I'm drinking and partying, do not talk to me with a phone in your hand.
Oh, yeah. That also sounds very much so her. I'm not so surprised.
Good. If I'm dancing and you take a picture, we have a problem.
Oh, absolutely.
It was so good.
Let's enjoy this moment in time.
Exactly.
And she's totally about that,
yeah.
And then with Carol as well, I think when I was doing my thing for as long as I was, at the time when she was crossing over from Colombia, I remember I was at an award show in Miami, and Spanish press sometimes really loves to feed off of the drama and creating, these storylines that don't exist to engage an audience.
What's a soap opera?
Totally, absolutely. And so I remember being super caught off guard when I was in an interview and someone goes, "Oh, so how do you feel now that there's another G in the house?" And it was the way that they said it too. And I was like, to be honest, we need more of us.
Yeah.
Like, I love it. This is great.
Yeah.
And she knows, like, I've always tried to make the best effort to be so real with her and constantly making that intention to connect, even though sometimes, schedules are super busy. And so when we would see each other, it would always be great. And I invited her to be a part of like a lot of songs. And she's a tough one. She's very, very...
She's particular.
She's very particular, exactly. Which I appreciate. Like a part of me feels like I can learn something. So I gravitate towards that naturally. And it was funny because when I wasn't looking for it was when Mami happened. And I was in the studio working on Esquemas, and Ovi came by to like hang out, and he had some ideas, and he had sent me the demo of the song during the holiday, and I had a vision for it, and I wanted to bring more like Mexican elements to the song, more guitar. The chorus was there, and I was like, I think I could do a really dope verse, and so I recorded Mami, right? And
it's done.
It didn't even have a name,
it's
really.
And like,
there was
no
official name either.
Yeah.
And he was also working with Carol a couple days later, and I had a missed call. I was like taking care of my mom because she had just gotten out of surgery, and I just saw my phone blowing up. So I'm like, is everything okay? And I look, and it's Ben, my manager, and I answer, and he's like, have you checked your phone? And I'm like, is everything okay?
Yeah. And
he's like, Carol's trying to get a hold of you. And so I'm like, okay, let me see. And I hang up, and she like FaceTimed me like 7 times. And I was like, oh man, let me call her right back. And I did, and she was in the studio, and she's like, I just want to play something. And she plays me just the part of her doing like the intro of the song. And in that moment, I was
emotional?
like, I had been wanting to like have a moment where the G's came together and really showed people, because, there's I don't want to say now, but at the time when we were all coming out, there was very few women in Latin music that were this next generation that we had been at it for so long. Like Carol it's not just this overnight success. Same with Nati Natasha, same with Anita. Like there's a lot of work that goes on to get to these moments. So I had been wanting to do something with Carol for so long, and it felt right. Like I said, it was the serendipity of it all. It just happened, and she wanted to be on the song, and I was like, let's go. And she was like, I can only do it if it's released this date. So I scratched my entire album release plan. I was like,
Becky.
let's go.
That's right.
I'm down.
That's right.
And there was a lot of like ups and downs that came with a last minute release. As we all know, it's not easy, but
you cleared the way, and that's what great artists do. You recognize when you have greatness in your hand, and you keep all the distractions and all of the complications at arm's length, right? And it's out, and then you're on stage bringing it to life.
Yeah,
and everyone's going
at
crazy.
Coachella.
I know.
Yeah,
and everyone's going crazy.
It was beautiful.
You lit up the internet that day as well. You lit up the internet. You lit up the internet.
I mean, look, I just think that it's a beautiful thing as artists to get to share stories, whether they be our stories, whether it be stories that we hear, the car next door to us on the freeway. Someone that, I mean, like I said, when I first started ESQUEMAS, the first batch of songs, I was in a really low in my life, and there was people very close to me going through so much pain, and that really inspired so much. And so I think it's beautiful that a song can be kind of like a picture in time.
And then your mums were there too.
Yeah.
And
it was like awesome.
Yeah, isn't it funny? You can go through these dark times, and then an album or a project or a moment in your life as an artist will forever remind you of that space. Where are you now? If you were in a dark place when you started this album, where do we find you today?
I think she's figuring it out. Like I came to the studio early this morning to do my therapy session, because I didn't want to not do my therapy session because it's such a priority for me. And so, yeah, I think I'm just being honest.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, therapy is great for that. What is it? I mean, I love it. And
awesome.
I'm a huge advocate for therapy. And if you can afford it or make time for it in your life, and we know that life moves fast and there's a lot of different priorities, but, you have to prioritize your mental health, especially in this current day and age. And one of the things I really love about it is that I used to think it was going to give me answers, but it's not. What it does is it gives me the strength to find the answers within, and it brings stuff to the surface in a really real way.
Yeah, I like to say, you don't go to therapy for someone else to give you the answers. You go to therapy to be asked better questions.
Yes, perfect.
You can sit here all day and be like, why me? And it's better. The better question is, why not you?
You're someone who, I mean, you've talked really openly about the journey you've been on from a young age. And you're a survivor, man. You've come through the other side of that and are now in a place where you have all your inspirations in the right places.
Thank you.
A lot of times there can be a jadedness, and again, you talk about the competitive battle-weary spirit comes from just being on call the whole time. But you put yourself on call. I was reading a conversation with you a while back, and you talked a bit about a midlife crisis that you had when you were a kid. Mm-hmm. More like a pre-life crisis, probably.
Yeah, pre-life crisis probably makes a lot more sense, but it was very real to me.
Yeah. That moment of like urgency, that sense of like it has to happen and I can't wait. Yeah. Very young to have had that experience. What do you think your parents made of that?
I think, as a parent, now that I'm older and I have the relationship that I have with them, through our recovery and healing of just traumatic experiences and just the learning of life to this point has, sometimes you feel like you failed. You feel like you failed as a parent. You didn't know that you were putting that pressure on your kids because you yourself were a kid. Like my parents were literal babies having babies. And so it's different when you're older because you see your parent as another human being. You don't see them as this like superhero that they were supposed to be, And you also have the maturity and awareness to know that they're also not the villain, that they were also probably a victim of trauma, a survivor of some sort of, traumatic experience in their life. And so there's this like very beautiful exchange that has happened in recent years for me, to understand that none of the harm that was done to me by, dreams being like let down by people in the industry that I thought I could trust with my dreams, or my parents just supporting me in the best ways they knew how to, even if it was in the wrong direction,
Yeah,
you know, with the wrong.
And were doing the best they could with what they
were
had.
just doing the best they could with what they had and what they knew. But still giving yourself the space to say, hey, but it still let me down, you know?
Yes.
Like it still let me down.
That's really important.
I still carry this little baggage with me, and
no one should get a
that's
pass, right?
Yeah.
It's like accepting the consequences of that is a huge part of the bonding of the human experience.
Totally, 100%. And I think that, you know, the reality is a lot of youth in our communities experience that, specifically in colored youth, because we at a very young age have to grow up very quickly. I grew up in a neighborhood where I was, you know, a translator for a lot of my peers in school, in elementary school, because their parents didn't speak English. And then once they learn English, you're skipping school to go to doctor's appointments with your parents to translate, or they're showing you the bills to understand, you know, what does this mean? And you're a literal baby, like you just learned how to read.
Have you seen Coda? Did it ring true?
So that's what I'm saying. It's just like, it's circumstantial. It's like, it's literally kids not being fed, you know, can affect their grades in school. Like how they test, if they had breakfast, if they didn't have breakfast. Like you can't, I mean, I don't know about you. I can't think when I'm hungry. Talk to me after.
I'm the wrong guy to ask. I've had the worst eating habits for like 30 years.
I love food. I can't think if I'm not fueling my body. So even, you know, there's youth that go to school that aren't being fed, and not because their parents don't want to feed them, but one, maybe they can't afford it, or two, their parents are already at work, or they have to wake up twice as early because they go to school in another district, and so the commute too is longer, and so they've been up 2 hours earlier than the other kids that go to their school, and it's not the other kids' fault, you know. So there's like so many things there to dissect that it's not your fault, you know, like. It's also like what happens to you. Like it's what you make of it that I think really matters. That's yours.
Okay, so now we've reached a really interesting part as well, because on top of all of that, beautifully put, okay, if it's not your fault, then you're part of the solution then? Because that's the only other option we have. And so, Becky G, like the way that you're able to express yourself about these things would suggest that you're just getting, to me at least, we've just met, really. You're just getting started. Like, I sort of feel like you're going to travel far and wide to try to make people's lives better. I feel like this is who you are. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's definitely
That's what's
the
driving
goal.
it, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So all of this work right now is a step to something even bigger.
Yeah, that's definitely how it feels. Like I love music so much. It's my first love. It's the driver.
Still make music and make people's lives better. Look at Jay-Z.
Yeah. But it's like, I don't know, it definitely feels like the one thing that really fuels the creative part of me is just the connection. And I think it stems from wishing to be seen. Like, you know, like.
Oh, that's so fascinating, dude, because it's like your desire to reach people comes from a desire to be reached.
Yeah, but it's like making sure that no one else ever has to experience that.
Yeah, but
like that's it, you know?
But in order to use that fuel to do great by people, do great work, you can't necessarily ever separate yourself from it altogether. Yeah. And so there's always a little bit of pain there. Absolutely.
It's so painful. Yeah. But I'm honest about that too. Now, more than ever, you know? It's funny, there's a TikTok that I did. There's like this challenge where like you would do like these taps on the camera, and then once the beat drops, like it was like this like I'm going out transformation, and it was like yes, and it was like before therapy, and I was just like in my house, and it was like after therapy. The reveal was like I was like a literal mess, like crying my eyes out, and I was like, been that bitch, still that bitch, we are out here, you know. But it's like that is also real. Like I can experience really beautiful highs in my life while still acknowledging that the lows exist, or that there's repercussions to, you know, the exhaustion, to the stress, the pressure that sometimes we just put on ourselves. Like I am my own worst enemy for sure sometimes, most times these days.